Biomutant is finally here. I've been playing non-stop, and here is everything I've learned in my first roughly 15 hours. We've got exploration tips, combat tips, character creation tips, and upgrade tips. So, let's go. This video is sponsored by me. If you're going to enjoy this video, be sure to hit that big red subscribe button and the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and leave a comment below if you've got a better tip or a tip that I've missed throughout this video so we can all help each other out. As always, I will have the specific sections linked in the chapters down below if you're looking for a certain type of tip or something very specific to help you get better at this game. We're going to start off with exploration tips. Biomutant is primarily an exploration game, so you will be exploring a lot, and unlike Ubisoft games, the locations aren't actually marked, so you don't necessarily need to follow quests, just really explore. Your upgrades will primarily come from just wandering around the world and finding interesting things. Most of the locations aren't marked. If it looks interesting, it probably is. Go over and have a look. A key thing to focus on when you are looking around are these tower-like locations. There are towers that are resource towers that can give you things for upgrades, side towers that give you side points to use for your upgrades, as well as these fast travel points. Side note, with fast travel, you do need to interact with a fast travel flag before you can actually use it again in the future. So make sure you go up to it, interact with it. They pee on it for some reason. Once you've peed on it, you're good to go. There are also many hazard areas throughout Biomutant. Now, one of the decisions you make at the very start of the game is what resistance you're going to choose for your mutant, but you can change this later by spending bio points to increase your resistances, as well as the armor you're wearing will also increase resistances for specific hazards that you will find in these zones. Bio points can be found throughout the world by the green glowing boxes, but they are predominantly found in the biohazard zones by killing the creatures that are in those zones. So you want to maximize your biohazard resistance as soon as possible, so you can go into those zones, farm these bio points. You can also use them for mutations if you choose, but then you can actually spend them into your resistances so you can spend more time in these different zones. When you are in these zones, pay attention to buildings. If you can get inside a building safely, you will reset your hazard counter. It will go back down to 0. Then you can head back out into the hazardous zone and explore. When you are exploring, mostly outside of these hazardous zones, you will find these little creatures. Depending on the region you are in, they will look different, but you can interact with them and pick them up. When you do pick them up, you can decide whether you are going to kill the creature or save it and pet it. If you do save the creature, you will gain 1 aura in your light. If you do kill it, you will gain an aura in your dark. So this is a good way to get extra dark aura or light aura if you are going to use these later for different upgrades, or you're looking to either be super evil or super good. It's also worth mentioning that in dialogue options, the right option typically is the good or light option, and the left option is the bad or dark option. So it's just something to note there. It doesn't make it explicit where you are in these dialogue options, but right means good, left means bad. Some other little minor things for exploring: you can jump onto a wall and latch on and then jump off. This is a good way to get a little bit of extra height if you're trying to get to areas that are a little bit higher than you can currently get to. You can do this to get kind of like a triple jump, so you can get a little bit higher and latch onto something else. There is lots of yellow paint, or I actually don't know if it's yellow paint, considering that you pee on the fast travel signs and it's also yellow. Anyway, there's yellow paint that you find throughout the world. This usually indicates that you can explore these areas, so you can climb up this wall, or maybe it's a wall that you can break, something like that. It's usually an interactable thing that you can interact with. If you do get stuck when you are exploring, like say you're drowning in water, or you just get fundamentally stuck, you can fast travel at any time. You don't have to be at another flag to fast travel to another flag. You can just fast travel whenever you like. And even if you are exploring in an area and it says you have cleared it, chances are there is still going to be 1 or 2 little boxes to pick up, which is really valuable for health items, especially in the early stages of the game. So make sure you're hunting down everything in each area. Now let's move on to combat tips. If enemies are fighting, and that happens a lot where you get 2 factions fighting each other, it's often a good idea to only attack one at a time, so then you can focus fire that group down and then start fighting the other. If you attack both groups and they both start focus firing, you can be a little hard in these encounters in the early stages of the game. Super Wufu is something that you will get access to very early, but it doesn't really come into effect until you start upgrading your Wufu abilities. Super Wufu is like a slowdown mode where you get to use specific abilities, like you can punch the crap out out of people, slam people on the ground, or get like a max pain slow-mo weapon fire for your ranged weapons. In order to activate this, you need to use Wufu abilities that actually hit their targets in succession after each other, but you cannot use the same Wufu 3 times. So you need to at least have 2, so then you can hit with one, use the other, and then go back to the first one. So you need to make sure that you have 2 unlocked. You also need to know how to use these abilities. Something that I've found with most of the weapons and the combinations of weapons is that these button combinations are very similar. It's usually the same rough buttons that you press. Some of them are unique, but most of them are roughly the same. So you can get used to these button combinations early on. Once you've unlocked them through your Wufu abilities, then you can use Super Wufu, which is just a good benefit to have in combat. You can heal at any time, even if you have been knocked up in the air or something like that. You can just activate the menu and heal. You don't have to wait for a certain animation. There is no heal animation. When you are in combat, there is a lot of interesting text that you can do when fighting certain enemies. When you're fighting smaller enemies, you can dodge over them and then activate an attack. It will give them a brief stun. It is better to just dodge smaller enemies and larger enemies to actually parry them, because it will stun them and you can then land as many hits as you like until they get back up. When you are fighting smaller enemies, if you do get them in the air, it is also a good idea to just spam attack them when they're in the air. It's a good way to stop them from fighting you back, and you can deal a ton of damage to them. It's not really a combat tip, but it's just something to note, is that in the early stages of the game, I found combat to be rather cumbersome until I started to unlock the Wufus and the different Psi abilities and mutations to use during combat to really give myself more animations and different things to do during combat. It's where the combat really starts to shine and it becomes much more enjoyable. If you're just sitting there spamming the basic attack or the basic ranged attack, it does get very boring very quickly. Make sure you are using these different abilities, and it actually makes combat significantly easier for you as well. Character creation tips. Now, I'm going to have an entire video talking about character creation, the classes, what you should pick, everything, but at a high level, your breed ultimately isn't as important as we were originally led to believe. This really just gives you a head start on your specific build that you're focusing on or your desired playstyle. When you level up, you can increase one attribute by 10 every time you level up. So it doesn't matter too much what your starting stats are depending on how you've mutated or the breed you've chosen. My advice here is probably just to pick something that you like the look of and then really develop your character as you level up. It's also worth noting that there is a vendor that you can find throughout the world which can actually change the appearance of your mutant. So even when you do mutate after choosing a breed, if you don't like that mutation, you can change it later, which is just changing the appearance, not your actual stats. When you're choosing a tolerance, as mentioned, pick biohazard so you can go into these regions early and start grinding out bio points. The only real decision that matters is your class, as there are specific perks that are locked behind certain classes, as well as certain classes starting off with perks that give them a significant advantage over others. I'm going to break down all of the classes in a different video probably, but at a high level, Saboteur and Merc are for melee users, Deadeye and Commando for ranged, primarily Deadeye there, Psy-Freak for like if you want to focus on the Psy abilities, kind of like a mage, and Sentinel is kind of like a tank, although I don't really see a benefit to being a tank, but if you want to be one, then pick the Sentinel, I guess. But otherwise, let's get into some upgrade tips. There are a lot of decisions you're going to make when you level up. There's really 4 things. The first is your attribute. Now, when you do pick an attribute, this will buff the secondary stats underneath it. My advice in the early stages is to kind of just focus on your luck so you can get your loot chance and your critical hit chance up until you kind of know what you're going to do with your build. There is nothing wrong with having a good luck because you get a better loot, which ultimately gives you better gear, which ultimately means you're going to be better in the long run. Your upgrade points is the next thing you'll focus on, and you use this for your Wufu and your perks. Now, don't forget about your perks. I originally spent a lot of points into Wufu and completely forgot about perks. So the perks really bring builds together. It's no good just being able to press certain buttons to activate certain animations if you don't have the perks to back them up, and that'll really bring your build together. The next is the bio points. We've discussed them a little bit, but you use the bio points for your mutations, which is kind of like Psi abilities, although they're mutant abilities, as well as increasing your resistances, which, as recommended, put your points into biohazard first and then start looking at the other 3. The last is your Psi points. Now, you do find these throughout the world by these totems, and there are other ways to get them as well, but Psi points are your psychic abilities, kind of like mutant abilities, but for psychics. There are certain psi abilities that are locked behind your aura. Just to reiterate, if you do find these little creatures, you can kill them or pet them and keep them, and that will give you a point either in the light aura or the dark aura. If you don't want to make the dark aura decisions in the game, this is how you can get access to the dark aura psi abilities without actually making those decisions. Crafting is where the upgrades and the character itself really comes together. Before we talk about actually making the gear, you're going to need to actually have the resources in order to craft the gear. Now, you're going to find a lot of armor and a lot of stuff just throughout the game. A lot of base pieces for weapons and gear that you can craft, a lot of add-ons, as well as just straight armor and weapons. When you do find armor, especially armor you're not going to use, I highly recommend to dismantle it to get the resources from that armor. This is the best way to be able to craft in the early stages, as well as maintain a constant stream of crafting resources, as the resource towers or totems are few and far between. Once you do have a decent set, you can start selling things. I usually sell armor that is worth around 3 to 4k when I'm looking at it with that little currency. Everything else I dismantle just to give me a good baseline, so I'm getting some currency so that I can spend that currency on buying better equipment for myself, as well as getting the resources so that I can then craft that equipment. It's a good idea to try and find that balance somewhere. For weapons, just dismantle every single weapon, because you will get all of the pieces back that you can then later use to craft even better gear. So it's better to do that rather than sell it. You could have a legendary mod on that weapon without even knowing, so just dismantle it, get that gear back. You could even sell some of those pieces back to the vendor if you decide you don't actually want them. Now, when you're crafting gear, in a lot of cases, it's actually better to change the base type of an existing weapon rather than crafting a new weapon. So when you craft a new weapon completely from scratch, the resource count for that is going to be exponentially higher than if you are picking up a weapon you're already using and changing the base type. If you change the base type of an existing weapon, it will become something different, say a rifle to a shotgun or a slash weapon to a crush weapon, but it will be significantly cheaper, and you will already keep the mods that are already attached to that weapon when you do craft it, so you don't spend so much resources just creating new weapons from scratch. You will also find these balloons throughout the world which you can climb, and you can actually upgrade an existing weapon's quality or material. It will increase the stats of that weapon, though it is kind of expensive, but if you do really like a weapon, it's a great way to increase its stats so that you can keep using it in the long run. If you're looking for more Biomutant content, check out my breeds video, which goes through all of the 6 breeds, their strengths and their weaknesses. Please follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and on Twitch, where I stream 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays, Australian night times. Hope to see you guys there in the next stream. Thank you for watching this video. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.